Hello and welcome to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio. Researched and written in Indianapolis by Adrian Peterson and produced in the studios of WRMI in Okeechobee, Florida, USA. I'm Jeff White. Today on Wavescan, phantom radio stations in Canada, our ancient DX reports for 1908, the contest reminder about our rare QSLs contest, also our Bangladesh DX report. It was back in the year 1919 that the Canadian National Railways, CNR, was formed as a government-owned corporation. Over a period of time, CNR has owned a sprawling and interconnected network of rail lines across Lower Canada and down into the United States as far as the Mexican Gulf. The tall, iconic CN Tower was constructed in the 1970s on CNR land at the waterfront in Toronto. And in addition to these vast public enterprises, Ray Robinson of KVOH tells us that they also operated their own radio broadcasting network for a period of 13 years, running from 1921 into the earlier part of 1933.
Over a period of time, CNR developed a network of radio programming distribution and radio broadcasting stations. At the height of its radio activity, CNR owned and operated 3 broadcasting stations. Its programming was relayed live by 30 or more radio stations across Canada, mostly under licensed phantom call signs, and it operated 78 passenger radio carriages that picked up CNR programming for the benefit of travellers. The first CNR venture into experimental radio broadcasting took place in the summer of 1921 from the CNR-owned passenger vessel SS Dalhousie City. At the time, the Dalhousie City was afloat on Lake Michigan, and an experimental transmitter was installed aboard the ship under the call sign CKUC. Several experimental broadcasts were made from the Dalhousie City, and they were received at the nearby 1921 Toronto exhibition in a specially equipped CNR railway carriage. During the summer of the following year, CNR repeated the radio broadcast from the ship Dalhousie City with the use of a portable Marconi YC3 transmitter under the same call sign CKUC. A new steel railway carriage was fitted out with radio receiving equipment, and this was on display at the CNR location in the Canadian National Exhibition in Toronto. The first day of regular broadcasting from CKUC was August 26, 1922, and 2 hours of programming was on the air daily in 3 segments on the medium wave channel 680 kHz. The first land-based station constructed by the Canadian National Railways was station CKCH in Ottawa, which was officially inaugurated on February 27, 1924. The studios were installed in the Jackson Building on Bank Street, and the transmitter was a 500-watt unit radiating on 690 kHz. The recently formed CNR radio department wished to operate its radio broadcasting stations under call signs beginning with the 3 identification letters CNR, but the international call sign sequence CN had already been allocated to Morocco. The Canadian government, on behalf of CNR, obtained approval from Morocco for these desired call signs, and so the CNR radio call sign list ran from CNRA down through the English alphabet to CNRX. And thus it was that the original CKCH in Ottawa became CNRO on July 16, 1924. Station CNRA in Moncton, New Brunswick was inaugurated also in 1922 as the second station in the CNR network with 500 watts on 960 kHz, and the third and last station owned by CNR was CNRV, which was inaugurated in Vancouver on August the 11th, 1925 with 500 watts on 1100 kHz as the Voice of the Pacific. However, in addition to its own 3 stations, CNR obtained licenses for phantom stations across Canada, whereby CNR programming could be relayed by other already established radio broadcasting stations. When CNR programming was on relay from another station, CNR was permitted to use its own phantom call sign over the air. This CNR network programming was thus made available to listeners in each local area and also to travellers in specially equipped railway parlour cars. The first CNR network broadcast was an interview with the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George on June 1, 1923. He was travelling from Montreal to Toronto in one of their radio parlour cars. However, the first pre-planned network broadcast was a Christmas and New Year programme that was aired on December 30th, 1923. Two stations carried the programme in English and French, CHYC in Montreal and COA in Ottawa. The first phantom call was CNRM in Montreal, and the CNR programming was heard over CKAC on Thursday nights and CFCF on Friday nights. The first three-station network program was heard in March 1925 in Montreal, Ottawa and Toronto, and there was a special broadcast from the deck of a ship in Montreal Harbour in the same year. The first national network program right across Canada was the 60th Jubilee Confederation broadcast on July 1, 1927, and the regular coast-to-coast network broadcasts began on December 27, 1928. A total of 23 stations from Halifax to Vancouver carried this Jubilee program, including an American medium-wave station, WWJ, in Detroit. There was no phantom call sign in use for the WWJ relays. In 1930, 27 stations were carrying the special CNR programming. In addition to the long list of medium-wave stations on relay with CNR programming, several shortwave stations also carried this relay of radio program broadcasting. For example, on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of Confederation, the unification of the original 4 provinces of Canada into one nation within the British Empire, the Marconi shortwave station at Drummondville, near Montreal in Quebec, carried the programming beamed towards Europe. A 1931 entry shows Drummondville relaying CNR programming via station VE9BA, and 3 years later via CGA4 with 15 kilowatts on 6465 kHz. The American shortwave stations KDKA 8XK Pittsburgh and WGY 2XAD also provided programming for broadcast over CNR radio in Canada, and sometimes they relayed Canadian programming to other parts of the world for live relay in other countries. Smaller shortwave stations such as CFCF in Montreal, CFCN in Calgary, VE9HX in Halifax and VE9GW in Bowmanville all carried CNR programming in parallel with the medium-wave parent stations. Program production for CNR Relay was produced in the studios of the 3 stations owned by the railway system, though the main coordination studios were in station CNRV at the Pacific Central Railway Station in Vancouver. QSL cards and QSL stamps were issued on behalf of the 3 CNR-owned radio stations, as well as some of the CNR Phantom relay stations. However, change was on the way, and in November 1931, the Canadian National Railways ended their reception of radio programming in special radio parlour cars. And then in early 1933, CNR sold its radio facilities to the newly set up Canadian Radio Broadcasting Corporation, which in turn became CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, in 1936, as it is to this day. And thus ended the fascinating 13-year story of railway radio in Canada from 1921 to 1933, with its unique list of alphabetically progressive call signs running from CNRA in Moncton, New Brunswick to CNRX in Toronto, Ontario. Back to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Ray Robinson, for that report. Last week, we presented the first part of talk, well, a slide presentation, really, that I had the opportunity to give at the 2014 annual meeting of the National Association of Shortwave Broadcasters in Greenville, North Carolina, this past May. Today we have the final part of that talk, focusing on the animal life at the WRMI Cattle Ranch in Okeechobee, Florida. We're on the ranch there, and we have lots of animals around. Wild hogs are abundant, wild turkeys. There's a fox, squirrel, deer. There are a lot of deer. Well, we have lots of armadillos around, and lots of green frogs, little tiny ones that make really loud noises. Saw that turtle there the other day. And we have usually at any one time 3 or 4 alligators in the pond there, right beside the transmitter building. They usually don't get any further out of the pond than that, but occasionally, they move from one pond to the other because there's several ponds on the property. And so the other night at about midnight, Thais was taking the dog out, and she saw this thing in the parking lot that she thought was a tire until it moved. And it turned out to be about an 8 or 9 foot alligator. But it was moving in the opposite direction, fortunately. Since we go back and forth so much, when we were up there, it's so far from everywhere. If you stay in Okeechobee, it's 30 minutes away. But we put this trailer up. It's right beside, you can't see the transmitter building on the left there, but it's right beside the transmitter building, so we have water and power and so on. And we're right there beside the alligator pond. As a matter of fact, one of the engineers there, Pat Travers, has an airboat back behind there that he's fixing up, and so maybe we can do that in the summertime when the water, when it rains a lot. It's like swamp in there, and we can take airboat tours. Plenty of wildlife to see.
Okay. You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. Send your comments and reception reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana 46229 in the United States. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana 46229 in the USA. Or you can email us at wavescan@awr.org. Our email once again, wavescan@awr.org.
Thank you, Ellen. This is our Ancient DX report for 1908. The year 1908 began at midnight when a 700-pound electric ball fell from the flagpole atop the New York Times building, the first ever ball drop in Times Square, New York. This leap year ended 366 days later with a nearly 2.5-hour flight by Wilbur Wright, the longest ever made in an airplane. In the days between, the U.S. Navy's Great White Fleet sailed around the world. Admiral Robert Peary began his conquest of the North Pole. Dr. Frederick Cook reached the North Pole, or claimed to. 6 automobiles set out on a 20,000-mile race from New York City to Paris via Asia. And the Model T went into production at Henry Ford's plant in Detroit, Michigan. The events and innovations that occurred within that 12-month frame a century ago marked in many ways America's entry into the modern world. In some cases, they quite literally put modern America in motion. So said Jim Rasenberger of the Smithsonian Magazine in January 2008. Nikola Tesla, on January 5th, 1908, said, "The expert already realizes that practical wireless telegraphy and telephony are possible. Before the close of the year, wireless transmission across the Pacific and transatlantic wireless telephony may be expected with perfect confidence. The use of the wireless telephone in isolated districts within the United States will spread like fire." And Thomas Edison in 1908 said, "Anything, everything is possible." Well, the year 1908 was a concentrated year in which remarkable development took place in many different areas of human expertise, including wireless and radio communication. Several major attempts were made at radio program broadcasting, and we could say that information and entertainment via radio was beginning to make its mark through this electronic medium, even though distortion and interference were still quite evident. The American entrepreneur Archie Collins made several successful attempts at radio broadcasting, and he activated an arc transmitter at 51 Clinton Street in Newark, New Jersey, and transmitted voice and music. On July 9th, Collins sent voice messages from his laboratory in New Jersey that were heard on a receiver in the Singer Building in New York. Later in the year, he sent voice messages across the intervening 81 miles between New York and Philadelphia. Collins established a demonstration display of his wireless equipment at the New York Electrical Show in October, and the noted Guglielmo Marconi paid a visit. He courteously stated that Collins should be credited with the invention of wireless telegraphy. Among the wireless experimenters and developers in the United States during the year 1908 was the 21-year-old Walter Willenborg of Hoboken, New Jersey. His first newspaper coverage was granted during 1907, and he began to achieve prominence in the wireless world during the year 1908 due to a very large article in a magazine for boys about his achievements with his self-made equipment. Luxembourg-born Hugo Gernsback launched the world's first radio magazine, Modern Electrics, from his newly adopted city, New York City, in April. And on May 12th, Nathan Stubblefield received a patent for his wireless telephone, based on induction transmission rather than radio frequency transmission. The first wireless transmission between the continental United States and Hawaii took place unexpectedly in mid-October, when Lawrence Mallorin at station PH on Russian Hill in San Francisco overheard his friend Arthur Isbell in Morse code at station HURCA Kahuku during the dark hours of the night. The Californian-based experimenter Professor Charles Harold entered the wireless scene in 1908 with experiments in the transmission of voice and music, and the late teenager Francis McCarty transmitted music occasionally from his family home on Hayes Street near Ashbury in San Francisco. The United States Army successfully transmitted speech and music from Sandy Hook, New Jersey, to the Army base on Bedloe Island, in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. The United States Navy made many music and speech broadcasts from the Great White Fleet as it circled the globe, and the call sign of the Marconi station at Cape Cod was modified from CC to MCC, standing for Marconi Cape Cod. On February 2nd, the ship SS Cuthbert caught fire out in the Atlantic, 500 miles from its destination, while en route from Antwerp in Belgium to New York. The SS Cymric was bound from Ireland to Boston, and most of the personnel on board the stricken Cuthbert were transferred to the Cymric. On board the Cymric was a news reporter, and he arranged for a news report in Morse code to be sent via the ship wireless equipment to the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune. The first long-distance message from the Eiffel Tower in France was transmitted on January 12th. Then, during the summer, Dr. Lee DeForest set up a transmitter at the base of the tower with an antenna running up to the top of the tower. Following a series of test transmissions, he made a prearranged program broadcast with music and speech on Wednesday, April 1st. Reliable coverage was provided both day and night for a radius of 25 miles, though an engineer in Marseille sent in a reception report by letter a distance of 500 miles. In England, the Marconi engineer H.J. Round made a successful telephony broadcast using a modulated arc, as did Poulsen at Lyngby in Denmark, and his transmissions extended 150 miles on the first test. 3 experimenters in Belgium, R.B. Goldschmidt, Monsieur Rumer, and Maurice Philipson, made a series of test transmissions from the Palace of Justice in Brussels, which were heard at Liège, 70 miles distant. Down under, engineer H.V. Genvy, with the PMG department in Melbourne, Australia, established 2 wireless communication stations, one at St. Kilda and the other at Queenscliff, which enabled successful communication over the intervening 65 miles. Across the Tasman at Dunedin, down near the bottom of the South Island in New Zealand, 3 teenagers, now known as the Dunedin Boys, constructed their own wireless equipment and made a series of Morse code transmissions across the city and across the bay. They made a public demonstration of their equipment and sent congratulatory messages between local city mayors and the Prime Minister in Wellington, the national capital. The newspapers gave excellent coverage of the performance of these 3 boys, Rawson Stark, Stanton Hicks, and Cyril Brandon, though in reality their experimental transmissions were considered illegal by the local authorities. And that was the year 1908. Next in Wavescan, we go to Bangladesh. Here's Salahuddin Dolar with his DX report.
Dear listeners, and radio hobbyists welcome you in the August edition of Bangladesh DX Report in WaveScan. This is Salahuddin Dollar from the beautiful city, Rajshahi, Bangladesh. Glad to be back and thanks for listening. The receiving log of different radio stations which I monitored. 25th July, All India Radio Vivid Bharati program at 0100 to 0200 UTC on 9870 kHz. The SIU code was 444. Radio Veritas Asia in Urdu at 1500 to 1520 UTC on 15330 kHz. The SIU code was 333. 26th July, Radio Pakistan in Urdu at 1200 to 1230 UTC on 15360 kHz. The SIU code was 333. Radio Japan in Burmese at 1430 to 1500 UTC on 11740 kHz. The SIU code was 444. Voice of America in Bangla at 1600 to 1630 UTC on 1575 kHz. The SIU code was 322. KBS World Radio in English at 1630 to 1700 UTC on 9515 kHz. The SIU code was 333. 27th July, Radio Thailand in English at 1230 to 1240 UTC on 9390 kHz. The SIU code was 444. BBC Bangla Sunday Special Transmission at 1400 to 1455 UTC on 11730 kHz. The SIU code was 444. Radio Sante Cosmic Wave in English at 1500 to 1520 UTC on 15190 kHz. The SIU code was 333. Radio Taiwan International in English at 1600 to 1630 UTC on 15485 kHz. The SIU code was 454. 28th July, Voice of Islamic Republic of Iran in English at 1020 to 1100 UTC on 17640 kHz. The SIU code was 333. Voice of Turkey in English at 1230 to 1240 UTC on 15450 kHz. The SIU code was 333. China Radio International at 1400 to 1450 UTC on 11675 kHz. The SIU code was 444. Voice of Vietnam in English at 1600 to 1630 UTC on 7200 kHz. The SIU code was 333. Bangladesh DX team will issue EQSL card for the reception report of this program. Please send your reception reports and comments to the following email address: dxbangla@gmail.com. dxbangla@gmail.com. Okay, I will come with more DX news in the next edition. Till then, take care. Salahuddin Dollar, Rajshahi, Bangladesh.
Thank you, Salahuddin. Adventist World Radio is issuing a special invitation to shortwave listeners around the world to participate in the 2014 annual DX contest in association with this DX program, WaveScan. Shortwave listeners, international radio monitors, and DXers around the world are invited to search their collection of QSL cards and letters for rare, unusual, and unique verifications. You're invited to make up a list up to 5 in number of your QSLs in this collective category, and to write a short paragraph about each. Partial entries for this year's contest are considered to be valid. At the conclusion of the contest, we at WaveScan are planning to write up and publish a detailed compilation of interesting information on a worldwide basis about the rare, unusual, and unique QSLs that come to light in this way. This will be the first occasion in the history of international radio broadcasting for the compilation of such a QSL list, and you're all invited to submit entries. You should remember to participate in our big annual DX contest in September, which comes to you under the title Rare, Unusual Unique QSLs, AWR Focus on Asia 2014 Annual DX Contest. In brief, you're invited to make up a list of your rare, unusual, and unique QSLs, up to 5 in number, and provide a photocopy of each one. Then describe these QSLs in one brief paragraph for each one. Provide reception reports for 3 AWR Asian broadcasts. Provide a photograph of an Adventist unit in your country. And send 3 radio cards for the Indianapolis collection. As an example of a rare QSL card, back on February 19th, 1984, our editor Adrian Peterson heard an irregular transmission from the Voice of America underneath the time ticks from chronohertz station WWVH in Hawaii on exactly 15 megahertz. At the time, his family was living in Lahore, Pakistan, and Adrian was an official monitor for the Voice of America, so he reported the information to the VOA head office in Washington, D.C. Ultimately, it was discovered that the spurious transmission was leaking from the radio frequency exciter on a shortwave transmitter at the VOA relay station at Point Poro in the Philippines. The exciter was radiating as a low-power transmitter, and in due course, a letter from the legendary George Jacobs acknowledged the reported information. No doubt this letter was the only QSL ever issued for this spurious low-power VOA transmission on exactly 15,000 kilohertz. Music from Canada ends Wavescan today. 2 Canadian folk songs arranged by Anne McGinty. Thanks for listening to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio, researched and written by Dr. Adrian Peterson in Indianapolis. Several QSL cards are available for your reports on this program. Send your AWR and KSDA reception reports for Wavescan to the AWR address in Indianapolis, and also to the station your radio is tuned to, KVOH, WWCR, or WRMI, or to the AWR relay stations that carry Wavescan. Next week, From the Needles to Colombo, the radio story on the Isle of Wight, and our Australian DX report. If you'd like to send reception reports, the address is Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. Our email is wavescan@awr.org. That's wavescan@awr.org. I'm Jeff White at WRMI in Okeechobee, Florida. Till next week, good listening, everybody.